research is focused on prevention of youth violence and bullying, as well as the promotion of healthy student development and achievement through supportive and structured school climate. I'll now ask, will I just have two members have a word? They will be Ted Deutsch from Florida's 22nd District, who will introduce our witness from Portland, Florida. Ted, here.
I am. Thanks. Thanks, Congressman Scott. Thanks for holding this important hearing. I regret that the majority did not join us here today. I am so pleased to introduce a language arts teacher in my community and a survivor of the horrific shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas, Stacy Lapel. It's hard to know how anyone would respond to 150 bullets fired in under 5 minutes, just 20 feet down a school hallway. When a gunman hunted his former classmates in the halls of Marjory Stoneman Douglas, Stacy Lapel responded by putting her students first. That's what America's teachers do, putting their students first every single day. Long nights and long weekends, grading papers, developing curriculum, school supplies paid for too often out of their own bank accounts, and now, sadly, protecting their young students from unspeakable violence. Stacy says she went into a strange autopilot mode when the shooting started. The shooter, just 20 feet away, fired a barrage of bullets. One grazed her shoulder. Others of those bullets killed her colleague, Scott Beagle, just across the hall, as he too helped students enter his classroom to safety. It's clear that Stacy Lapel is a great teacher, but it's time for our colleagues in Congress to ensure that neither she nor anyone else, any other teacher, anyone else working in a school is ever put in that position again. To ensure that teachers can teach, students can learn, without the fear of weapons of war tearing through their hallways. I would not be the first to call Stacy Lapel a hero for what she did to keep her students safe on February 14th, but I will nevertheless do so publicly, and I thank her for that. Stacy, thank you for your dedication to your students. Thank you for your heroism on February 14th, and thank you for coming to Washington to help inform the important work of this committee.
Thank you. And Elizabeth Esty from Connecticut to introduce our final panelist.
Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be with you here today. I want to thank Ranking Member Scott for inviting me to join, although not a member of this committee. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Diana Wenzel, who is a real hero in our state for leading education, being an educator herself, and leading education policy for many decades now in our state. And to Stacy, I want to say, representing Newtown and Sandy Hook, teachers who did not make it out, who did what you did. And we know our teachers put their lives on the line, but they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to, so thank you for your courage. But we are united in our effort to make sure there are no other teachers or students who are faced with the choices you were faced with that day. So Diana Wenzel is an extraordinary educator and has been committed to helping lead our state in the wake of what happened at Sandy Hook Elementary School 5 years ago for Connecticut to try to lead the way and find a way to honor that commitment to educating and nurturing our students and yet having them be safe as well, and not turning our schools into prisons and not turning our faculty into guards. So for Diana, thank you for joining us here today, and looking forward to you telling us how our state has helped lead the way for the nation of policies that really do work, that cherish our students, support our educators, and make schools a safe haven for learning in our great country. So thank you again so much all for being here today, and I too want to express my regret that this is not a bipartisan hearing. Those students don't wear D's and R's after the name, nor do any of you at this table. And this is an American problem that requires an American solution. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to the committee for allowing me to participate today.
Thank you. Now I invite our witnesses to begin their 5-minute testimony. Please note that our staff will flash a yellow card to signal when you have 1 minute to wrap up. Where's the, okay. and you'll see that when the red card is flashed, that means 5 minutes is up. Dr. Ross.
No written word nor spoken plea can teach our youth who they should be, nor all the books on all the shelves is who the teachers are themselves. To Ranking Member Scott and honorable members of the committee, thank you for the honor of addressing you today. My name is Dr. Akil Ross. I'm in my 8th year as principal of Chapin High School in South Carolina. I like to cite that poem from the Nobel Prize-winning Rudyard Kipling as a reminder that our students learn from the actions of the adults. Each day, our actions become lessons. As an instructional leader, there are 2 types of decisions that I can make. Situational decisions that solve today's problems or sustainable decisions that solve tomorrow's problems. I'd like to share why we have to follow some of the recommendations because every school study that we have says the same thing. As principal, I'm trusted to make the best decision for my 1,400 students, their parents, and our community. They have trusted me to make sure that our students are physically and emotionally healthy. We take the whole school or whole child approach in our community by meeting the needs of our students' mind, body, and spirit. A culture in which each student feels known, valued, and connected. With the support of this amazing community and the tireless efforts of committed teachers and my leadership team, I was honored and selected this past October as the 2018 National Principal of the Year by the National Association of Secondary School Principals. Creating the school climate is my primary responsibility as principal. As a result, we deal with a wide spectrum of safety issues, from bullying, fighting, substance abuse, suicide, and school shootings. To maintain a safe and healthy school campus, we must have a strong continuum of care for students, which includes prevention, intervention, and recovery. My concern is that the national conversation about school safety is far too narrow. All of the discussion is focused on the interventions. School safety is it's much more than the absence of violence. It's about preventing the problems from festering before the need to intervene when that disturbing behavior becomes violent behavior. This is a lesson I learned from my parents, but it was a story that my father, who served in the Navy, taught me, that the Navy understands the power of prevention. My father served on an aircraft carrier in Vietnam. He told me stories about how the carrier is the most valuable ship in the fleet. It has the fewest defenses in the fleet, however, because the Navy understands prevention. They surround the carrier with ships, planes, and submarines that makes attacks virtually impossible. The parents of Sandy Hook promised they call this the school ecosystem. Surrounding every school in our nation, there should be a fleet of preventions, including training faculty, staff, students, and parents on the signs and threats, and referring students to help, including partnerships with law enforcement for school threat assessments. Half of the schools in my state don't have an SRO. It includes access to mental health professionals at each school. I share a social worker, mental health worker with 4 schools, and I'm one of the lucky ones. And finally, reporting systems that lead to long-term treatment for mental health and family counseling. If we do not put a funding emphasis on providing schools with these resources, then we will be forced to spend money on interventions and recovery. I'd like to conclude with a story about the power of prevention. I cannot use the names of the students. However, there was a school counselor back home who saw a young man whose behavior had changed. She said, "I need to see you tomorrow." And on the next day, she called the student in, and the student said, "Last night I was going to take my life, but it was your promise of meeting with me today that I decided to give it another chance." She called home and told the parent, and to the dismay of the parent, her honor roll student had a gun and a journal in the basement. I start to think about what happens when we don't have these preventative personnel on the front line. There's a lot of things that we can do. It was this counselor who showed us the way. And so I would suggest that we place a premium on the prevention part of the continuum of care. If schools have the wraparound services and the capacity to identify students early, we can provide essential supports and build students' resiliency. Again, if we don't invest in prevention and preventative personnel, we will keep spending money on interventions with the same tragic results that we see too often. I want to thank this committee for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Stacy?
Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I thank you for giving me the time to speak with you today. I'm already emotional. On February 14th, I spent the day at school like any other day in room 1255 on the 3rd floor of the 1200 building, also known as the freshman building at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. It was Valentine's Day, and kids were happy and excited as they walked through the halls with their oversized stuffed animals, oversized balloons, and oversized energy level. It was 4th period, and I just taught my creative writing class how to write the perfect love letter. They were animated and silly. Meadow Pollock wrote a letter to her longtime boyfriend. She told me they were together for 4 years. Joaquin Oliver resisted this assignment because he already got his girlfriend plenty of things. But I told him a handwritten note would go very far. He proceeded to write love notes on cutout hearts and tape them to his shirt. My students told me that he did write an actual love letter, put it in his backpack. Then everything changed. At about 2:20, we heard a popping sound that sounded like a computer part fell over. The class was loud, so the sound was muted. Approximately 2 minutes later, the fire alarm sounded, signaling that we should all evacuate the building. It was unusual because we had already had a drill that morning, but I knew that culinary classes were cooking with oil, so evacuating was nothing that I would have even hesitated doing. So many scenarios popped into my head at that moment. Fire in culinary, or maybe that sound was firecrackers, and there really was a fire. I never ever thought that this was a result of gunshots because the context wouldn't have made any sense. We live in Parkland. Nothing bad ever happens in Parkland. I shouted above the alarm to my students that I would be taking attendance at our usual spot outside. I grabbed my emergency folder and my phone, and waited for the last student to exit before I closed and locked my door behind me. I walked about 2 feet from my door when I heard the gunshots down in the stairwell. The stairwell is about 20 feet from my classroom. All the students who were in the stairwell started screaming and running back towards me and other classrooms. I quickly turned around, unlocked my door, and very quickly ensured that the lock was back in a lock position so that when I shut my door, it would already be locked on the outside. I don't know how else to describe this action, but it's very important because it truly saved my life and my students' lives. Shots were firing and students were pouring into my class. Kids who were mine, kids who I'd never seen before. I held my door open and pulled kids in as I watched the scene unfold before my eyes. I saw the shooter emerge from the stairwell and stand very firmly in front of the hall, about 20 feet from me. He was constantly shooting as he sprayed his rifle back and forth with no particular direction. I don't know how he didn't hit more kids with all the bullets flying in the hallway. It was foggy with smoke, but I kept my eye on the shooter. He had on a helmet, a gas mask, and what I thought was a bulletproof vest, which held ammunition. All I know is that he looked like a man with a very menacing weapon in his hand. I remember thinking, is this real? What is going on here? Why is this man shooting at us? But I never broke from my task at hand to get as many kids into my room as possible and get that door shut in autopilot mode. I don't remember screaming. I definitely wasn't crying. I just knew that saving my students and myself was very important. I don't know when I decided that now was the time to close my door, but I did. I shouted at Mr. Scott Beagle to close his door because his classroom was right next to mine, and he was ushering students into his room just as I was. I grabbed the door handle with both hands because I wanted to make sure to pull it tight. It was then that I was grazed by a bullet. I remember feeling a little sting, but soon forgot it. As I was shutting my door, 2 of my students who wanted to get in, as they were still in the hall, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Two of my students wanted to get in as they were still in the hall. Understand that even though there were still kids running in the hall, I had to make the decision to shut my door or risk getting shot and putting my students in danger. I don't remember reopening the door. They told me I did. I opened it a crack. Mr. Beagle shoved them in, then I pulled my door closed and hung onto the handle for a few more seconds to ensure that it was really, really closed. Another action I don't remember, but my students told me I did this. I jumped over to the blind spot in my room where I trained my students to go when we had a code red. I threw myself on top of my students and held onto as many as I can sink my nails into. Seconds later, I heard a barrage of shots in Mr. Beagle's room, and immediately after that, the shooter fired about 4 or 5 times right into my classroom through the glass panel in the door. I remember stretching my neck to see if he was going to reach in and grab the door handle through the broken glass. He didn't. He continued, he could have easily entered the classroom and shot us all. He continued to fire shots down the hallway. I kept looking at the clock thinking, this is definitely not a drill. School should be over soon. These were the strange and random thoughts we all had, because even though we were living this nightmare, it just seemed impossible that this was happening. I kept staring at the shattered glass on the floor as well as the bullet casings. We all heard a boy screaming in the hallway, "Help! Open the door! Help! Let me in!" But we couldn't open the door. The shooter could still be on the floor. If I opened the door, it would put us all at risk, so we cringed every time we heard the screaming. Students were texting their loved ones. I texted a coworker who was on the other side of the school that there was a shooter in my building. My son was in her class. My daughter was in a classroom close to the other side of the school as well. I don't remember texting my husband. I don't remember answering texts from concerned family and friends. I deleted all of my texts that night because it made me sick to my stomach to look back at them. I spent the next hour making eye contact with my students, holding on to them and doubting that everything was going to be okay. When the SWAT team arrived, I still didn't get up to open the door. What if it's the shooter? They barged in, pointed their guns at us, and ordered us to put our hands up in the air just in case the shooter was among us. One of the men pointed at me and asked, "Teacher?" And I said, "Yes." He asked me to make sure my students didn't look down as we left the classroom. I stood up and immediately saw the body of Scott Beagle on the ground. I couldn't process that he was dead until a student looked at him and screamed. I went into teacher mode and ordered her to look up. We stepped out of the classroom and saw carnage everywhere. There were bullet casings, smoke, shattered glass, blood, and bodies throughout the hallway. It was a war zone. I still couldn't process what I was seeing. We live in Parkland. Nothing bad ever happened in Parkland. Students screamed and cried as they looked down and saw their classmates dead on the ground. I grabbed them and pushed them down the stairs and finally out of the building. 2 of my beautiful students, Meta and Joaquin, who were finishing up their senior year on a high note, were brutally murdered. My heart breaks for their families and aches for the loss that I feel. I knew them both since they were sophomores. I do not know how I wasn't killed. I should have been killed. I'm thankful that I reacted the way I did because my students needed me to be there for them. But they're all scarred. I have 219 students on my current roster. Since February 14th, an average of 10% of my students are absent because they aren't coping well with their experiences. They don't feel safe in school. I was in the trenches, and I was shot at. I saw the shooter and what he was capable of doing. I don't know how he got on campus and why he chose the 1200 building. In closing, I would like to thank the committee for inviting me here to share my story and do all that I can to make sure that this never happens again. I look forward to responding to your questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Coldain Hayden, and again, I'm a sophomore at high school for energy and technology and a youth leader with Sisters and Brothers United and a urban youth collaborative in the Bronx, New York. Thank you for having me here today as the country dives into a national conversation about school safety. It is important that we center the voices of students. I'm happy to represent my fellow New York City students and youth of color from across the country. In an ideal school environment, I would feel safe inside and out. I would be happy to go into school because I see the people who make me feel comfortable and whom I trust. Instead, I feel caged in, unable to communicate, often feeling like there are a lot of eyes on me. Every day, my first contact with school is a metal detector. We have to line up, take our belts off, sometimes our shoes, and put our bags through scanners. School police officers yell at us to hurry up and throw our belongings in, with no regard to what's inside. The metal detectors are often a place where we see a lot of confrontations from police. When we buzz, we are patted down and wanded. It doesn't make us feel welcomed, and instead makes us late for class. It's frustrating that we have to go through all of this just to get into my own school. What is worse is that only students go through the metal detectors. What message does that send? That we are the problem? That we are what makes schools unsafe? It's dehumanizing. New York City schools have 5,500 school safety agents, our version of school resources officers, and only 2,800 full-time guidance counselors and 1,270 social workers. The school police are housed under and trained by New York Police Department. Police patrol the hallways, lunchrooms, get called into classrooms to handle everything that is a discipline issue, and oftentimes escalate conflict with students. I'm a big African-American teenager. What I fear the most is that if I make the wrong move or start playing around with my friends, a cop will come and tackle and handcuff me. It sounds like an exaggeration, but it's not. It's reality. From the assault in Spring Valley in South Carolina to the assault in Philadelphia, Black and Latinx students face police violence in schools. And for what we ask, regular student behavior, like talking back, being late, cutting the lunch line, wanting to use the bathroom, and refusing to hand over their cell phone. Remember when you were in school, did you use the bathroom? Lead to getting put in a chokehold by a school police officer? Being late for class results in being slapped in the face or kicked to the floor? In New York City, Black and Latinx students make up 67% of the school population, yet represent 92% of all arrests, 83% of all summons, and 84% of all juvenile reports in schools. It is clear to me that the over-policing of New York and across the nation is actually an investment in criminalization and incarceration of youth, specifically youth of color, LGBTQ youth, and students with disabilities. This is a trend we see across the country, from Oakland and Los Angeles to Wake County and Miami. In my school, I see many of my peers struggling with a lot of social and emotional issues. There's no space to talk about in schools. We don't have enough support. It pains me that my school is struggling with only one guidance counselor and 400 plus students. No social workers to support the development of students. Instead, the NYPD responds to about 98% of all mental health emergencies in schools, where students are having a mental health crisis and emotional crisis. Between the 2016-2017 school year, about 97% of students handcuffed during child and crisis issues were students of. When even saw 2 5-year-olds get handcuffed, I can't help but feel like we are treated differently, more aggressively because of our own skin. I know. And okay, the neighbors we come from, and let me restart that. I can't help but feel like we are treated differently, more aggressively because of the color of our skin, and the neighbors we come from, and how adults view us. Metal detectors, guns, police, that's all perceived safety, and that position of safety is at the expense of us. It is the responsibility of the federal government, cities, state, and districts to fund the safety policies and programs that actually work. It includes restorative justice. Restorative justice can fundamentally transform a school climate. It restores relationships where there has been harm and builds a level of trust we need in our schools. Through peace circles, conflicts resolution, and peer mediation. We have seen schools do away with zero tolerance and criminalization. The High School for Energy and Technology shares a building with 2 other schools. One of the schools above mine is working to implement restorative justice practices. It has been powerful to see the relationships being built with students and staff. Increasing funding for more counselors, social workers, mental health, and programs like restorative justice is much wiser investment. It is investment in our education, our safety, our communities, and us. Our cities must divest from school policing. We deserve schools where teachers are armed with books, not books, with books, not bullets. We deserve to be treated as students, not prisoners. We deserve to be heard. End the school prison pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
That was lovely.
Good afternoon. My name is Diana Wenzel, and I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Education in Connecticut. I will begin my comments as directly as possible. I wish we did not have to be here today. I wish there was no reason to engage in this dialogue. But coming from a state that has seen the face of gun violence firsthand, it is all too clear that these conversations have regrettably become necessary. We are living in very challenging times. There are political and cultural issues playing out on a national level, unlike anything we have seen in many, many years. Battle lines have been drawn. Tension is rising too fast. Make no mistake, whatever the ultimate outcome, it will have a lasting impact on our country, and it is time to do our part to make sure it is the right outcome. A temporary memorial was recently created here at the United States Capitol, displaying 7,000 pairs of shoes, empty pairs of shoes, an impactful image which represented the roughly 7,000 young people who have died as a result of gun violence since the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14, 2012. On that date, the hearts of all Connecticut residents broke, and I'm not sure we will ever recover. While we continue to grieve and get angrier each time we hear of another shooting, we have made huge strides in Connecticut under the leadership of our governor. We now have some of the toughest gun laws in the nation, which include a ban on buying assault weapons, new eligibility rules for the purchase of ammunition, a prohibition on the sale or purchase of magazines carrying more than 10 rounds, and the requirement for universal background checks. The governor has also championed measures to increase a focus on school-based diversion initiatives that reduce juvenile justice involvement, particularly with youth with mental health needs, and has committed over $50 million in grants to improve security infrastructure at our schools without compromising the learning environment. Passing these measures were all steps in the right direction for our state, but they will not solve this national epidemic. The most recent shootings in Parkland, Florida, and now this morning in St. Mary's County, Maryland, have left the country stunned and angered once again. But this time, students like Coldane from across the nation are standing up and are exercising their voices to demand action from Washington. They are walking out of classrooms in coordinated protests to say enough is enough. They are standing up and fighting for the simple and obvious right to go to school without being shot or having the fear of being shot traumatizing them. They are literally fighting for their lives, and we must too, so that no additional lives will be lost because some lawmakers are unwilling to stand up to the gun lobby. Enough blood has been spilled. 7,000 dead children is simply unacceptable. Schools should be places where all students feel welcome, safe, and ready to learn. They should not be made into barracks or fortresses. As a lifelong educator, I know that arming teachers is not the answer. It is dangerous, it's bad for the educational climate in our schools, and it could have a profoundly negative outcome in our classrooms and communities. When law enforcement officers descend on the chaos of a school shooting scene, and there are multiple people holding guns, they will not have the opportunity to distinguish between the good guy with a gun and the murderer. Our teachers did not sign up for that. It's time to shift the national focus to what we as educators know works. Increased emphasis on social emotional learning, greater access to mental health services, and a commitment to restorative practices. It's time to invest in school-based health centers as we have in Connecticut. It's time to end zero-tolerance student discipline policies in our schools that have a disproportionate impact on children of color. It's time to stop school-based arrests and to shut down the school-to-prison pipeline. It's time to engage parents and communities in an open dialogue to promote positive climate in our schools. It's time to stop pretending that this problem might go away on its own. Teachers should be armed with the skills and supports necessary to carry out our work, not armed with guns.
Thank you. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Joaquin Tamayo, and I'm grateful to have been asked by this committee to offer my testimony as a lifelong educator on how to create supportive and high-performing school environments that enable all children to achieve their potential and become active and engaged citizens of the United States. As a former high school teacher principal, I believe it's essential that we inform with evidence and data, as well as with experience-informed perspective, the national conversation about how to keep our kids safe and well-educated in school. I applaud the committee for hosting the forum today. So what do we know about some fundamental actions that work to make schools safer and effective at teaching and learning? First, we must hold every school principal, school superintendent, and state education chief accountable for ensuring the regular upkeep of critical infrastructure in our school buildings that are designed to keep people safe, like doors that can be secured from the inside in the event of an intruder in school, as recommended by the National Association of Fire Marshals and the Sandy Hook Advisory Commission. In addition to infrastructure, every school needs a security plan, a staff well-trained in emergency response, and a responsive central office with the capacity to quickly act on any safety issues brought to its attention. These are basic elements of school safety that can be acted upon immediately, and there are effective resources for school districts and states already that they can use, like the Readiness and Emergency Management in Schools Technical Assistance Center at the U.S. Department of Education. I'd urge Congress to help by funding the maintenance of our schools' physical plans and training of educators in emergency response to reduce the impact and likelihood of an active shooting event in the future. And second, as required by the Every Student Succeeds Act, we must continue to work to establish the conditions for student learning, ensure student success, their daily attendance in school, and support students' physical, emotional, and mental well-being. We know from experience and research that students attend schools with strong climates. As reported by the U.S. Department of Education, quote, students are more likely to engage in the curriculum, achieve academically, and develop positive relationships, and are less likely to exhibit problem behaviors. And I believe Congress can further support schools by to fund critical resources that lead to school climate improvements, which schools and states and districts often struggle to develop on their own. These are two specific actions, improving infrastructure and school climate, that have evidence of effectiveness in improving safety and can be acted upon immediately. That said, in our urgency to act following the school shooting, I would caution Congress, as well as my fellow educated citizens, to understand and avoid what doesn't work to make our schools safer places for students. What we know doesn't work is a rush to increase unnecessarily punitive suspensions from schools. Suspensions generally only exacerbate problem behaviors of disaffected students. The bottom line is that we simply cannot go back to the days of zero-tolerance policies that not only failed to enhance safety but resulted in the push-out of millions of children of all backgrounds from our schools, thus creating a corrosive school-to-prison pipeline that funnels far too many children, particularly students of color and students with disabilities, into the criminal justice system. I have grown troubled by suggestions and discussions of school shootings that there's an evidence-based link between equitable treatment of all children and the decision of a man to murder 17 people in a school. It is simply bad education policy and practice to do anything that further exacerbates the suspensions in schools that are leading far too many of our young people to become disengaged and thus without positive prospects for their future, leaving them less healthy, less able to achieve a decent quality of life, and more likely to engage in destructive, even criminal behaviors. Furthermore, data tell us that we should avoid the urge to dramatically expand the reach of police power in our schools. There is no conclusive evidence or data that school police on their own make schools safer, but we do know that resource officers who are not well trained and held accountable to work effectively in a school can lead to an increase in suspensions and expulsions from school. I believe this is both unfair to the school resource officers as well as to our students, and why in 2016 the U.S. Department of Education and Justice released the Safe School-Based Enforcement Through Collaboration, Understanding, and Respect rubrics that outline research and evidence-based best practices for effectively integrating school resource officers into the learning environment. We have before us a historic opportunity to make the United States a more perfect union by learning from recent lessons. When it comes to the safety of our students and adults in schools, we need to act on what we know works and do less of what we know does not work. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much.
I was trying to figure out what they were talking about here. My staff was telling me I had to be someplace else, and I was like, no, I have to be here.
Dr. Cornell.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dr. Cornell, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, Congressman Scott, Leader Pelosi, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm Dr. Dewey Cornell, Professor of Education at the University of Virginia. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I've studied youth violence for 34 years as a forensic clinical psychologist, and in 2001 I developed a threat assessment program for K-12 schools. Currently, I direct an NIJ-funded project to study statewide implementation of threat assessment in nearly 2,000 Virginia public schools. Decisions about school safety should be guided by scientific research to use evidence-based practices. I have three main points. First of all, violence in schools is just a small part of the larger problem of gun violence in our society. Although it is disturbing to read that there have been 300 school shootings since the Sandy Hook shooting, CDC reports tell us there have been over 500,000 shootings outside of schools. Our schools are much safer than the surrounding community. We do not have a school violence problem, but a gun violence problem. Our study of FBI data found that homicides are 10 times more likely to occur in a restaurant than a school. So those who believe that arming teachers is a good way to protect our children should also, logically, be advocating that we arm restaurant cooks and servers. Shootings are more likely to occur in shopping centers and public parks than in schools. We cannot turn every location into a fortress. This leads me to the next point. We need a more balanced approach that places greater emphasis on prevention. Our response to gun violence is often an emotional reaction of increasing security and preparing for the next shooting rather than prevention. We've already tried security measures, and the available research says they're not very effective and that excessive security can be harmful. It's been reported that schools spent $5 billion after the Sandy Hook shooting. Even if we spend $5 billion more and somehow make every school impregnable, we would stop only 0.1% of all shootings. We need legislation that has a real emphasis on prevention. Prevention must start long before the gunman is in the parking lot. Comprehensive prevention requires a three-tiered public health approach. First tier, universal programs, such as improving school climate so that all children can succeed in school. Many mass shootings are committed by individuals whose anger and resentment was fueled by bullying, harassment, and discrimination they experienced at school. We need school discipline reform so that students are helped to correct their behavior rather than being driven out of school as part of the school-to-prison pipeline. On the second tier, prevention means helping at-risk youth before they start down the pathway toward violence. Our schools, as you've heard, are underfunded and understaffed when it comes to special education and mental health services. Put an armed guard in a school, and you might prevent one shooting in one building. Put a counselor or psychologist in a school, and you have the potential to prevent multiple shootings throughout your community. The third tier is to identify and intervene with students who are moving down a pathway toward violence. This brings me to my final point. Threat assessment is a safe and effective way to help students who threaten violence. Threat assessment is a systematic process of evaluation and intervention for persons who've made verbal or behavioral threats of violence. Now, threat assessment was developed to protect public figures, but 20 years ago, the FBI and Secret Service recommended that it could be used in schools. The traditional law enforcement approach to threat assessment is focused on assassins and terrorists, but we're working primarily with kids. So my colleagues and I developed a threat assessment model that was adapted for schools, and over the past 17 years, we've disseminated it to thousands of schools nationwide and conducted 11 studies of its effects. Now, kids make threats frequently when they're angry or upset or just trying to get attention. In almost all cases, students need counseling and discipline, not criminal charges. Schools must be careful not to overreact to student threats. To be effective, threat assessment teams should use evidence-based practices, which means that they're supported by controlled studies. In 4 studies, we found that fewer than 1% of students carry out their threats. An important concern is that threat assessment might increase the use of exclusionary discipline and might disproportionately affect students of color. On the contrary, 8 studies found that our schools saw a decrease in school suspensions and used expulsions and arrest in only 1% of cases. We've also found in 3 studies that threat assessment does not produce racial disproportionality, but actually reduces it. In conclusion, we believe that prevention has long been overshadowed by the rush to increase security measures. Threat assessment is valuable so that students are not stigmatized or punished for minor misbehavior. It allows schools to identify students in need of mental health services and take law enforcement action when it is appropriate. Let's give prevention a chance. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. I think we've heard what the problem is and many effective solutions from an evidence-based perspective. So I want to thank all of our witnesses for putting this problem into proper perspective. Madam Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for bringing us all together today. I wish the Secretary of Education had accepted your invitation as well as your chairman of the committee, because what we heard today, and I've heard what you were saying before I even got here and read your statements, was very important. The thread of prevention that runs through what we're talking about here, Dr. Ross, and ending with Dr. Cornell. Stacey, thank you for sharing your story with us. You're so brave to be here so soon. Coldane, really, you're just heart of the matter. You know, you just said it so beautifully. And Dr. Wenzel, I really echoed. You said we need books, not bullets. And I think, Dr. Wenzel, you said we need to arm our teachers with skills, not guns. So thank you. And then evidence-based decision-making. What a strange thought, right? That's the point of this hearing today, is to give us some more of that, the data that will help us know what we have to do. And your comment that this is a roadmap to accomplish by understanding, supporting, investing in infrastructure, school climate. I always say, you know, we tell kids school is so important, they should study, they should study, they should study, and yet sometimes we send them to schools that don't respect that same value, and they get a different message. So thank you for making that point. And Dr. Cornell, you took us right back to the prevention piece in such a very important way. Greater emphasis on prevention is just an answer to so much, which I heard all of you talk about. Let me just say thank you. Your presence here and your perspective that you bring is very important, whether it's personal in terms of Coldane, Stacey, in terms of your sharing the generosity of spirit you had to share, the professional judgment of others of you. I want to say something about our ranking member, Mr. Scott. This is a coming together, the convergence of so many of the, I want to say passions, but it's more intellectual than that, missions that he has been on in life, whether it's the safety of our children. He takes an oath. He loves the Constitution to protect and defend. The oath we all take, and protecting that Constitution and protecting our people are about student civil rights as we try to protect them. So I thank you for what you're doing. It's so sad for us that you're here the same day Mr. Hoyer couldn't be here with us because there was a school shooting in his district. So we know how immediate the threat is. But we have had a plan to check background check, strengthen background checks, allow CDC data to study gun violence restraining orders, and the rest. Somebody leaning against the wall again? But I have to say how refreshing it is to hear what you have to say, and the leadership Mr. Scott has put forth, which is so much common sense as opposed to the misguided policies coming from the White House, hardening schools, arming teachers, rescinding the Obama administration vital school discipline guidance, and even blaming some of the violence in schools and rescinding that policy. So anyway, we're fighting for the proven effective solutions, full funding, and thank you for your leadership, for student support and academic enrichment grants. And again, we thank you so much for the important perspectives that you bring. We're going to not just have a meeting. This is going to be an ongoing conversation, and we'll act upon the great guidance that you've given us today. Once again, I yield back to our distinguished chairman with gratitude for his leadership on this subject.
Well, thank you. And Madam Leader, your presence here emphasizes the importance of this meeting. You could have been anywhere, and you've got
working on the omnibus.
And so we appreciate your presence here.
Thank you.
Dr. Cornell, let me ask you just a couple of questions, and I appreciate you start mentioning the fact that when the shooter's in the parking lot, it's already too late. You've suggested that the threat assessment works. Is that replicable?
Well, we've replicated our threat assessment model in schools across the country. It requires good training. It requires a staff that's committed to implementation. And it requires adapting threat assessment for school use, for work with students, with young people, because young people make lots of threats. It's also important to recognize that threat assessment in the workplace, threat assessment to protect public figures, is a somewhat different process. We can't just fire our employees who aren't doing well. We don't fire our students. We want them to succeed. So our goals are much higher and stronger.
Thank you. Well, I think we just had a vote call, so I have several other questions, but I'll defer to my colleagues and ask them if they could keep their question or statement very brief so that everybody can participate. Ms. Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for your very compelling testimony. I think we've learned a lot from you, and what's really important is to be sure that everyone's at the table, and particularly our students. I had a chance to speak with our students in San Diego just recently after the Parkland tragedy, and they would send their love and their greetings to all of you here because it has really impacted them. No matter where they are. One of the things that you've all mentioned, and just very briefly, because I know we want to move on, is social emotional learning. Sometimes people hear that and they think, well, you know, soft skills, better to harden schools as opposed to building up people and developing those relationships. If you could, maybe one or two of you want to just chime in quickly, why is that so important? And how do we focus those resources in a way that would make a difference in this area?
It's really important that the student feels comfortable in their environment before they're ready to learn. If they're not feeling safe or if they don't feel that they have a voice, they're going to turn off. So it is important to make sure they're feeling safe, and I understand what my panelists are saying about not hardening, our schools. It's too late by the time they get into the parking lot. However, it is important to have someone at the point of entry of our school to ensure that if there is a threat, it could be stopped at that point. And currently, and I have to just speak for my student body, they want to feel that someone is protecting them on our actual physical campus. Because right now, my students aren't ready to learn. But prior to this, they want to have a bond with their students, with their teachers. They want to know that their teachers care about them, and then they will perform for their teachers.
Can I ask you just quickly, are those skills learned easily, or do you have to work at that?
You have to work at it. Sometimes they come naturally, but many times, you've got very shy kids or you have angry kids, and as long as you create a safe learning environment for them, even if it's just the classroom, they're ready to open up.
I understand that there's just one vote, so if someone want to go and vote and come back, we won't have to end the hearing. So, I'm sorry.
In Connecticut, this year, our State Board of Education passed standards for social emotional learning. And I think it is really important, because I think you're right, that people sometimes diminish the things our students need to know how to do and how to be able to do regarding social emotional learning as less important than the academic pieces. But just like our academic pieces, there really are sets of skills that kids can learn. And I think your organization is devoted particularly toward that. So we know that there are skills that can be taught, and our teachers can learn how to do that as well.
I think I'd say to that question, part of the problem is that there's this perception that learning academic can be disaggregated from positive social emotional development. Whether or not a teacher's doing that well or thinks he or she's doing that at all, that's still part of the mix in a classroom in a school context. It's better to educate and train teachers on how to do that effectively in an integrate in their normal, classroom instruction, as to thinking there's a cost benefit or a dichotomous relationship between academic teaching and social emotional learning. And so what Dr. was referencing, my recent work in building kindness, lots of people tend to think that one's ability to fix tree, but in fact, no. Just like social emotional learning, you can learn and develop over time, like, for instance, learning how to apologize, learning how to come to consensus, learning how to foster empathy for those who are different than yourselves. Those can be practiced and modeled and learned, developed, and grown over time. But states and districts and schools don't have an intentional way of doing that. It can be done well.
Mm-hmm. And Colde?
So the students want to have an emotional connection with their teachers and social workers, so we can, learn better, we can focus. Just talking to a teacher will be the greatest thing in the world. Not every teacher would be the right suit for that student, but there's other teachers and social workers that can. And it's just, there's a lot of people that has emotional issues, they're depressed. They just want to be spoken to, related to. You guys were teenagers at one time. So,
long time ago.
Wouldn't you want wouldn't you want to speak to someone? One of you can have a similar life that I'm living. So I would want someone to speak with me.
I'd like to piggyback off of Cordell. We look at the whole, and it's not just their academics or their athletics, it's their spirit, mind, body, and spirit. And one of the skills they're going to need is how to cope. And one of the things that we're talking about now is recovery. A lot of children in a lot of schools right now are waking up and going to school and they're worried. And how do you cope with that stress? There was a study that says that 6.3 million teenagers between ages of 13 to 18 are diagnosed with some type of anxiety disorder. Social emotional skills is essential to help them, not just for a test, but for lifelong learning, to cope in the right ways. And these are things that can be replicated. These are things that can be taught. But it not only helps recover the student, it helps recover our school communities, and that's how we maintain a positive culture.
Thank you.
School hall vote. And I'd remind members that it's just one vote, so that...
Okay, just thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this opportunity and for this ad hoc hearing. Very, very important. And Ms. Lapel, if I may, I think thank you for your moving testimony. It's appreciated, but I'm sorry you had to go through this whole tragic event to be here with us. And as you said, I would prefer not to. You described that you were within 20 feet of the shooter as he was shooting. And had you been armed, was there time to react? And generally, how do you feel about, what do you think about teachers, about arming teachers in a school?
I had seconds to respond, so if I had a gun, it would be useless and probably dangerous to my students or to myself. When you're put under a situation like that, you're just really trying to secure your students. So personally, I would never want to be armed. However, having a well-trained BSO or security people on campus, and having them armed, I think would be a very important fact to have on campuses. Because we don't want a threat to get past the parking lot. But a teacher who spends all of his or her time with students, there's so many moving parts there that it would be a chaotic situation.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Scott, let me thank all wishful thinking. Let me thank all the witnesses that are here today, and let me yield back to you for other members may have questions. Thank you.
Mr. Polis.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Tamayo. Many surveys have shown that the majority of teachers and students oppose President Trump's plan to arm teachers. As you know, schools are already strapped for cash, and arming teachers would only divert money from counselors and mental health services and other important areas that can help keep students safe. How would arming what they call a good guy with a gun and arming teachers, what kind of impact would that have on school shootings? And shouldn't we find a way to support teachers rather than gun manufacturers?
As a former teacher and principal, I'd say absolutely yes. There is no good data out there that would lead us to suggest that increasing the number of guns in our schools is going to make our students safer. And I don't think we want to wait the number of years that it would take to run some kind of randomized controlled trial study on schools with guns versus schools without guns. And, that's just not going to take us anywhere. But we have evidence of what we know does work. So I would not advocate guns in any school in the country. In states and school districts and schools that choose to employ school resource officers or other types of security personnel with guns, what we know works is that those officers are regulated by an MOU or some kind of contractual agreement between the school and the school district and that agency. If it's not an agency that's already controlled by the school district, that outlines proper chain of command, emergency response protocols, that requires the training of these resource officers to positively interact with students so they can tell the difference between a dangerous situation and an instance of minor school misconduct. These are things that schools and states already do. There's lots of examples of this. There's no excuse for any resource officer not to be guided by an MOU or a contract that clearly outlines this. I think where we have guns in schools and they are in the hands of people who are trained, we can do our students and our teachers a world of good by making sure, and Congress can help, I believe, by ensuring that it's well regulated and controlled in our schools.
Ms. Lapel, along those lines, have you ever in your time as a teacher accidentally left something in the classroom, maybe a cell phone, a purse? Have you ever left something like that behind accidentally?
Yes.
And do you worry that if teachers had guns, in fact, someday, no matter how well trained they are, some teacher might accidentally not secure it properly, you'll leave it behind, and a student might gain illegal access to it?
There's no doubt that something like that could happen.
I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for your testimony today. Wow. I want you all to know, Lapel, I want you all to know that I was 24 years in the classroom myself. I taught at a public high school for most of those years. I taught middle school. And I taught at a rather large public high school. At some point, 3,000 students in this school in Southern California. Mr. Tamayo, do you have experience with schools that scale in this country?
I do. I was a teacher at a 4,500 student school in Los Angeles.
So, Mr. Tamayo, can you tell people, I mean, I can tell you that we had 2 counselors per class. Unfortunately, our senior class was half the size of our freshman class because we would have so many kids lost to attrition. I see Mr. Ross nodding his head. We'd had 2 counselors for the freshman class, 2 counselors for the junior class, and really 2 counselors for each class, but the 2 counselors for the senior class, you know, they had to get the kids into school and write those. So even with the half of the number of students left, they were burdened. Mm-hmm. But can you tell me if the schools had any more resources than the one that I worked at in Los Angeles, as far as counselors went?
Well, it really depends on where we're talking about, the geographic location of these schools and the decisions of their states. I will say that because of a lack of funding and social emotional development, positive youth development, lots of our counselors, even where maybe they existed in what we would say adequate numbers in our larger schools or in any school, are often asked to do administrative tasks that have nothing to do with the proper guidance of our students. They're diverted, they're used as catch-all employees to monitor lunch or do this and do that. So in fact, even having people who have a counseling degree in school without proper training, without applying their skills to the root causes of whatever may be happening that relates to school violence or student misconduct, without that type of strategic integration into a school, you can have 20 school counselors in a school and that might not make a difference, right? So they have to be intentional employees in every single school so that they can relate to the students, they can help train teachers and accomplish specific tasks.
But the point I'm trying to make to Tamayo is, and I get it, it can vary from school to school, but in general, my sense, I don't think it's unusual for a school like mine or others to have a 1 to 500 student ratio. One counselor to 500 students, I think, is kind of the norm. Right. You may get an extra grant that may reduce that size, but trying to and bringing it down to the middle school level. And I don't even know if there are counselors. Well, there are counselors at the elementary level, but to be able to identify those students.
Yep.
Mr. Cornell, I mean, you see where I'm going with my line of questioning. What inspired my line of questioning was what you said about investing in a school psychologist, but identifying. I think we have a lot of research out there that shows, especially with the young men, the kind of emotional journey they go through through adolescence, that there are things we can do to identify folks and prevent. I mean, Mr. Ross, you're nodding your head. Maybe I should let you respond.
I'm currently doing that right now. You talk to our school counselors, they would say they would like to be 1 to 250, and that would give them the time to plan for the college and career expectations, but also do the things that Mr. Hayden talked about, these restorative practices, taking those students in, teaching these skills. So I agree with you. When you look across the landscape of schools, we're not staffed that way. We don't have that type of access for our students.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I do have my own opinions about what we should do about automatic weapons and preventing weapons getting into the hands of folks, and certain kinds of weapons just not being appropriate at all in a civilized society. But what we're talking about here is even a conversation this prevention is even separate from that. We're talking about identifying students early on and getting them help in the proper counseling, right? So, Dr. Cornell?
So one of the reasons schools have turned to suspension is because they're so understaffed in counseling and support services. That is, you discipline a student by sending them home, you're not spending any more time with them. And one of the barriers to implementing alternatives to zero tolerance and suspension is that we need enough counselors and psychologists and assistant principals working in our schools that they can spend the time with these young people and work out the problem or difficulty. Restorative practices are a great idea, but they take time and energy that many schools don't have. And
doesn't it not take intensive teacher training and servicing and the kind of I taught in a multicultural classroom. I brought my own assumptions into the classroom and had to question what I was doing with minority students.
Sure.
And does it not also include, I think, what we're talking about, a lot of staff in service?
Yes, and we have evidence-based programs to coach teachers, to educate teachers, to help them be more responsive and effective with diverse student populations. We know how to do these things. We've got good studies, controlled studies to show that they work, but what we don't have are the resources to put them into practice.
Let me just find, I know my time is up, and Colden, you want to add something to this?
One more thing. So you said something about to find, to identify the student first?
Yes.
So if you suspend them, that just isolates them. They get isolated from everyone, and it basically leads them to like two options: to drop out of school, or lead them to the wrong crowd, which can lead them to what's happening now. And we don't want that. That's just complicates everything.
So what I saw some people characterizing what happened at Parkland was students were ridiculing and making, but we're talking about a more systemic issue of suspension and being an inappropriate response to a misdescribed situation. So what I see happening is a misdescription of the problem that happened in Parkland. It's a predominantly affluent Caucasian. Stacey, you want to say something about that?
It's definitely getting more diverse, so it's not as predominantly Caucasian as you may think it is. There's definitely diversity infiltrating. But I think you were just referencing that the shooter was being ridiculed and bullied. There are definitely two different types of kids that would maybe fit under those two that one umbrella. From what I know of the shooter, only because I have some colleagues who taught him, he was odd, definitely off-putting. People were repelled by him. If he had someone, a connection with a teacher, it's very, very possible somebody could have got any nuances about him that would have been threatening. But he chose to isolate himself. I think people were more repelled by him and didn't necessarily ridicule him out loud.
Yeah, I'm not saying I was one of those folks that was just that people were,
clarify.
For different motivations, people were trying to characterize what was happening.
Right.
And what I see happening here is a policy that is going to do harm to minority students unnecessarily because of a misdescription. And this misdescription is being motivated politically to avoid the prevention, to actually avoid the issue about people possessing weapons and guns. But I think it's a horrible response to ratchet up this hardened discipline and rigidity in schools. It's going to harm education. It's going to harm kids. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Saban?
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I come from a place where everybody knows everybody, and a place with one of the most strictest gun control in the country until 9 months ago, somebody took the law to court, and there's something called the Second Amendment, so unfortunately. But I just want to thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts also. But two of my youngest are teachers. My second youngest is a young man who teaches special education for elementary school. Actually, I think the kids are teaching him patience more than he's teaching them. He's getting more to the bargain. My daughter, my youngest, is a young lady who teaches 10th grade English. I was home a month ago. I don't go home every weekend. It's too far. But I was home, and after work, I was working in a computer in the family room, and she comes up and she said, "Dad, did you hear about this young guy who committed suicide?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, I did today." She said, "Dad, that's my student." And I I never thought. She just never thought, and I said, you know, it's not your fault, but I think you should see a counselor. You should talk to someone professional about this, because I don't want you carrying this, you know, her carrying this. But it's just so much the young people these days. And yes, Colin, I think I was young once. I really can't tell you when. I forgot. But different. Because when I was young, my dad was allowed to spank me. Many times he didn't. He was just spanking the bed, but telling me to scream louder, so he could take me to the movies after that. But there was discipline, but nowadays it's so much hard. Like my daughter said, that's my student, and she tries to get to know her students, but she couldn't. She never thought that he would do what he did, and nobody has any idea why. So, but I want to thank you all for doing what you do, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here to give us your thoughts on this problem we have. And Mr. Scott, thank you for today's hearing.
Thank you. Ms. Esty, I think you were elected but not sworn in when Sandy Hook occurred. She represents Sandy Hook Elementary School.
Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you for staying with us here during these votes. And Coldain, I want to tell you that your voice and those of those Parkland students give me enormous courage. We're seeing the best of American students, your learning, your passion, your belief in this country, and your knowledge we have to do better. Not good enough. In addition to enough is enough, it is also not good enough what we are doing for our students. And I do feel more hopeful. In 5 years, when we haven't gotten a vote on any sensible gun safety legislation in this House of Representatives, I feel a wind blowing and change coming with your voices. So I want to thank you for stepping up and helping call parents and educators in this country to account, because that is in the greatest tradition of this country. I wanted to go back to this question about social and emotional intelligence, because we're looking at proposals to spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on bulletproof glass and doors and locks. And at the same time, I also have the privilege of serving on the Transportation Committee, where we spend a lot of time talking about resilient infrastructure. How are we going to deal with resilience? Are we using the best technology? Are we using the new learning about how to keep people and property safe? And I'm struck by the disconnect. The disconnect about our willingness on the one hand when we're talking about property, weather, to look at the evidence and apply it to save lives and make those investments. And it costs a little bit more money up front, but guess what? The payoff is for the long term, because we are making long-term investments in our future. And so I'd like you to go back, all of you to go back a little bit, and Dr. Wetzel, if you can start with what Connecticut has done. It is taking some money, but the long-term benefit, and it is not just on school safety, but it's the future of this country in our young people. I think about the opioid crisis in our state of Connecticut, which claimed 1,000 lives last year. Third highest rate in the country. A lot of young people among those, and so many other challenges we're facing. So it's not simply about school violence, but also about equipping the resilience of our young people to live out that American dream. And I think we forget that when we focus on doors and windows and locks on doors. Not that safety is not important, but resilience and investment in our future as represented by young people like Colleen. And thank you for talking about the metal detectors too, because I'm getting people saying, why aren't we doing that in every school? And it's important for you to talk about the impact on you every day, what that means and what that tells you every day when you're walking through, just the way when we walk through metal detectors at the airport, the message is, are you a terrorist or not? And that's the message we're sending to you and your classmates, and I'm concerned about that message. We've got to find a better word, so thank you, and look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Esty, and thank you so much for your support for public education and for the children and families of Connecticut. One of the things that we've done is we have invested a great deal in Connecticut in school safety, and some of it has been in infrastructure, about $50 million. But $500 million at the same time have been invested in our schools into strategies that support school-based diversion initiatives, restorative practices, reduction of exclusionary discipline, and improving intervention for students who need it. So we really have made the investment on the front end in our kids and in their future. Of the $50 million, which is a very substantial investment in infrastructure, I've been able to tour a lot of our schools that have taken advantage of those grants. And a lot of that has been done in ways that are completely invisible to the families and the kids that need their school to be a warm and welcoming environment. So a lot of it has been really smart investments in technology. And as you know, in our state, we're very excited about new technology. Some of these include apps that the school leaders can see the cameras at all times, cameras that are invisible to everybody but are there keeping the perimeter safe, sensor technology that can alert at any intrusion. Some of it is on things like better doors and things like that and windows, but a lot of the investment is really in better practices in terms of how we enter our schools, making sure that we have routines that make sure that we are aware of who's in our schools while we welcome them. Because schools need to be safe, welcoming places for our children and our families.
Well, I would say I'm glad you brought in your talks about the opioid crisis, because I don't think these are two different problems. I think it all starts with the prevention, and just as the answer for drugs is not more drugs, the answer for guns is not more guns. It's really focusing in on those preventions. When we talk about discipline, discipline means to teach. And if we're using suspensions and expulsions, our only teaching method, then we're wondering why we're not getting the learnings. And you hear Caldell talk, and it's great that we have the student voice at the table, because that's what we're teaching. And we should be teaching these restorative practices that came from his own mouth, as these are the skills that students are going to need in society. And so I would ask that as Congress, you hold us accountable for the right things. We're held accountable for graduation rates and test scores, but that's not what's most important. What's most important is how well we're preparing the Codells of America. And so I think that as part of our accountability, there should be ways where we have that continuum of care. How well are our states putting resources to the continuum of care, prevention, intervention, and recovery?
We do have a lot of sensitivity training, bullying, anti-bullying, and suicide awareness training. However, there are a lot of disconnected teachers because they're burnt out, because the burden is very heavy. And so I think that some teachers have just sort of turned that part off. So I'm a connected teacher, but it's also very draining. And when there is pressure from above to have those tight test scores, and that's the only thing that matters, and that's how we're going to get paid, that just continues to sort of add on the burden. But I think the goal is to get more connected teachers than disconnected teachers.
Thank you. Representative Wilson?
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here today. And this issue is very near and dear to my heart. I am a former elementary school principal, so I am very clear on what the challenges are in schools and what you have to go through and what happens in schools. And I think I was just appalled to think that a suggestion in my state of Florida. A bill was passed to allow counties to arm teachers to confront what I call terrorists in their schools. And I had so many questions and concerns about that. Where would the teacher have the gun? Would they wear it around their waist, or would they lock it away in a file cabinet for safety? And if all the children in the school who are disturbed and want to do a school shooting know that Mr. Scott is the bearer of the gun, the first thing they're going to do before they shoot up the children is come and find Mr. Scott at his desk and shoot him, since he's the armed one, and then they will go on the school shooting. But my state of Florida put that into law, and we have districts in Florida who already allow teachers and people to bring guns into schools. So I was taken when you said to prevent gun violence, you give more guns. To prevent drug abuse, you give more drugs. It's almost insane. And then I'd like to know how you feel about the different entrances into schools. I know in Florida, we don't have, like in New York, just one big enclosed building where there's one entrance that you come in and you have metal detectors. We have campuses, almost like college campuses, with several buildings spread out. And so what a school shooter could do, especially if that's their school, they go through the metal, well, first of all, they take the gun and wrap it in a towel or whatever, and they go through the metal detector. There's a panic bar on the door to the back. That's where the gun is. So they open the door, pick up the gun, bring it in, and go on the shooting spree. So the metal detector at the front door really didn't help them. I just want to say that I know I'm not supposed to be testifying, you are, but I just feel a need to say all of this. And I think Representative Scott knows me from, my history. And what I think the real solution is, how do you get to these children before they become school shooters? Because when a baby is born in the hospital and they cut the umbilical cord, the doctor doesn't say, Miss Wilson, it's a murderer. They say, Miss Wilson, it's a boy. So what happens in the interim from the time that umbilical cord is cut and this man-child becomes this murderer? So there's so much that we can do, but our elected officials don't understand prevention. So they don't want to fund prevention. They don't want to fund counselors in schools, and each school should have its own nurse, and each school should have enough teachers so you would have small class sizes so the teachers would know each individual child and have access to mental health facilities. And we used to have when you would be absent, the truant officer would come to your house. And it's just so many things that they've just cut back on. Now they have media centers, but no media specialists. The librarian is there packed with beautiful books, but no one to service it. And all of these troubled children are coming through schools. Then when they get to school, they're cutting band, they're cutting chorus, they're cutting arts programs, things that draw children to school, and nobody's mentoring these children. So when you find someone who's troubled and who is alone and stands out from the rest of the crowd, then there should be systems in place in those schools. If you had the money, if you had the resources, these principals would do that and reach out to that child who is so isolated, bring them into the fold, give them what they need. But every time we have a budget, what happens? Per pupil spending goes down. All of the money is sent to charter schools, private schools. It is a wreck. It is such a wreck that we have a shortage of teachers. No one wants to be a teacher because, and I sure wouldn't want to be one now if they say that you have to wear a gun. So I'd just like to get your take on what you would do if you had, if the country just paid attention to this issue and said this is going to be our #1 funding priority for the next 10 years. What would be on the top of your wish list for your children to keep them safe and to keep your school safe? That's my question.
If that was the #1, the first thing I say is amen. But I think we need to start with what we have out there, and I like to, the Sandy Hook promise that those parents did in that community, they showed that 93% of the situations, there were signs out there before that person even got to the campus. In 81% of the cases, that person actually said they were going to shoot up the school. And so if I had those resources, when those signs, I would train our staff, our teachers, and our parents, our students on signs. Those signs are out there and they happen early, as you say. You start to see that path towards this violence. Understanding this a continuum. It doesn't just start with homicide. There's suicide prevention. There's substance abuse. So we would take care of it from bullying to substance abuse to suicide to homicide. We would take care of that entire continuum. And so it would be putting the people on the ground, those school counselors, social workers, and mental health professionals. The only resources we have when it's suspension, it's not going to work. So we would refer them with places that can take them in and start that family counseling. But I'd like to go back to your point about the campus. And you're right. In the South, we tend to have campuses versus buildings. And you don't want your school to be a prison. And I think when they talk about giving teachers guns, they realize that after school, I have just as many kids outside on 7 different fields as I have when they're inside, and I'm still responsible for their safety. So I think that being narrow in the notion of how we protect our kids is stopping us from seeing the bigger picture. So to answer your question, if that was the #1, we would put those resources into building the resiliency of our children when we identify them from the signs early.
I wanted to say it takes a village, so it's not just the teachers. You know, it's definitely the home life, the parents. They need to be trained or educated as well. I'm going to be really specific about a wonderful program I was part of. Before I started working at Stoneman Douglas, I worked at South Plantation High School. I was part of a program called the Freshman Academy Program. When kids come in from middle school, because middle school, they're aliens. They're just not really, they're weird. And then they come in 9th grade and they need some guidance. We had basically almost a middle school mentality where kids were teamed with teachers who wanted to do it, because 9th graders are tough too. And the students were teamed, and we were all part of sort of a little village. And we were able to identify, let's say I was the English teacher, Dr. Ross was the science teacher, and somebody else was everybody's math teacher. We saw all of the same students every day. So we were able to identify. I would see that Johnny's not really himself first period, and I would call Dr. Ross, say, hey, he's not doing great right now, watch out for him. And then we had a talk with him. We were really able to really embrace all of the kids, and they knew we were watching, and they loved it. The only figure I was really able to dig up in preparation for this was the graduation rate with that particular group increased by 20%. So it's pretty big. There were probably a lot of other social and emotional growth percentages. I just wasn't able to get my hands on it in time, but it's a great program.
I do like the program that you shared, and I feel like that would
Speaking the mic.
That would make it better for students. I want to go back to your point with the funding, and how we don't have enough money for, we don't really spend enough money for the students. We want, better textbooks and trips and activity that would bring the odd kids to come back and talk to people and wouldn't be out somewhere isolated. It would bring them in and feel welcomed. And in New York, there's a lot of money getting sent out for policing than enough for education and activities like art and band, orchestra, drawing, and that would make them feel wanted or have skills that prepare them for the world.
I agree with the other panelists, and I would also say that we're seeing a great result in Connecticut from an investment in a comprehensive approach to student health and wellness, including school-based health centers that support the emotional and physical health of our students and their families.
I'll piggyback on that and say what I would spend my money on, or what I think Congress should spend the country's money on, is supporting durable partner. This problem of a school shooting is not the school's problem alone. It's a community's problem. It's involving multiple institutions, and I think if we, I hope your next panel has professionals from across the community, leadership, healthcare, juvenile justice, housing, you name it. Where there are communities, what we found in the My Brother's Keeper program, communities with durable partnerships across the whole ecosystem that supports a student. You have healthier children, less violent children, you have happier teachers, teachers who don't feel so burned out, principals who stay longer than 3 years in a school. You have a sustainable community ecosystem that develops far friendlier, peaceful citizens of this country, far less violent people. So, maintaining those partnerships, I will say that ESSA has specific directions to states and districts to create these types of partnerships. Maybe we should increase the accountability around those partnerships and the durability and the funding of those partnerships, but particularly at all the school-based health centers and really funding school health partnerships to make sure that kids have the mental health care that they need in the school if they don't have it outside the school is worth our investment.
I certainly agree with what's been said. I testified before this committee 11 years ago after the shooting at Virginia Tech. And I talked about the importance of prevention and threat assessment, and I would say the same things again. But I was dismayed at that speaker because a congressman from Florida stood up and objected to the whole idea of preventing violence. He said it's so unpredictable we couldn't possibly prevent it. And I don't know whether you took his seat or whose seat, but I will have to say that this whole idea that we can't prevent something because we can't predict who might carry out the act is absolutely wrong. A public health approach to prevention prevents many things that are unpredictable. Automobile accidents, cancer rates, all sorts of things. And we do that with a multi-tiered approach. We have universal approaches for all children to help all children succeed. We have second-tier programs for kids who are in need of services who are at risk. And then we have programs like threat assessment that are aimed at kids that are on a pathway to violence. So we need to think systematically about a multi-tiered approach. The Sandy Hook Promise program that I'm pleased to be able to support and work with is a gift from Connecticut to the rest of the country. And they're spreading throughout Florida, actually, Sandy Hook Promise is, training folks in their multi-tiered prevention program. So I think we should do more support for that kind of effort.
Thank you. Mr. Desaulniers?
I thought you were going to say raise teacher salary.
That too.
I'm still processing the idea of Mr. Scott with a gun. Committee member up against it. I just want to tell you all how, of course, this has been emotional for a lot of you, Stacey. Your comments and your courage and your focus. Colton, I appreciate you speaking truth to power and things that we've learned about echo your comments about your dad. Terrific. So we believe in this. We believe in evidence-based research. We believe in mental mental health service, behavioral health. We believe in family engagement centers, all these things that work. I was out at our county juvenile hall that 20 years ago I helped get built, and the county administrator said it's not going to be big enough. I was out there 4 months ago, and it's at 65% of capacity. I called a couple of our former presiding judges and juvenile probation chiefs, and they said, well, because we did those evidence-based policies. And it's true across the country, but to jurisdictions that embrace them. So, but the elephant in the room in this instance is we're not allowed in Congress to support research when it comes to gun violence. The Pacific Institute for Research in San Diego did a recent study that showed that gun violence in this country costs over $200 billion a year, and that's for profits of $1.4 billion to American gun manufacturers. So, sorry, all my pearls of wisdom were lost, but I hope you heard them. So any of you who want to address the context of who pays for this, to me, the people who profit from this should pay for it. To be perfectly honest with you, they have leverage, you could use other expressions, on this institution right now where we're not allowed to talk about it. We're not allowed to talk about it on the floor. It reminds me of John Quincy Adams was upstairs and he fought against the gag rule because the majority said you couldn't bring anything to the floor that talked about slavery. We had a sit-in a year or so ago led by John Lewis just because we wanted two simple bills to have a vote. We weren't demanding that they got passed. We just wanted the no-fly. If you're not allowed to fly on a plane, you're not allowed to buy a gun. And we wanted to eliminate the loopholes on background checks. But we couldn't get a hearing on that. We've had over 300 bills introduced, mostly by Democrats, some bipartisan, in the 3 years I've been in Congress. Not one of them have got a hearing. So somebody's got to pay for this. We made the tobacco industry using the medical model. We held them accountable. We made them pay for it. In states like Connecticut and California, where we've passed evidence-based research on gun violence, lo and behold, of the 10 states that have the most restrictive gun violence that's based on research, we have 7 of them have the lowest gun violence rates. So I can't help but, you know, in some instances, there's a clear cause and effect. I have people in California, constituents who come to me who are legitimate, honest gun owners, but they get up and they get all emotional and they say, you're trying to take our guns away. And my response is, do you have your gun? Is it legal? You live in California? Well, that's all we want to talk about, is we want to talk about what states like ours have done because it makes a difference. So this relationship is the epitome of what's wrong with this institution, and I wonder if any of you have your own perspective on that.
Well, I have a lot of hope, and I have a lot of hope because of students like Caldane that led protests in their own schools last week, and students all over our state, and I know your states as well, who walked out of their classrooms or did walk-ins, depending on their own school and how they decided to do it. But I believe our students' voices will make the difference. I think our students are telling us enough is enough. And I think our students and their families and the American people will begin to hold us all accountable and follow the money. And the blood money that the NRAs hold on everyone has to end. And I think it's time, and I think our students will lead that.
Well, to follow on your example of what Congress did to help end the scourge of smoking in this country, I understand the Second Amendment protects a right to bear arms, but doesn't protect the right to a cheap gun. So Congress could tax weapons. Congress could use that money like we use the money in the tobacco situation to say, this now funds safer schools, this now funds healthier children, this is now doing a good thing, I suppose, in some way if you buy a gun in this country. So you can do that. And then by taxing, of course, supply and demand would reduce the number of guns that are bought.
So I just want to tell you, you don't know this, but I have a bill. It's been 99 years since the federal government raised a tax on guns. So my bill would raise it by $5, and that would go similar to the NIH. It would fund research for gun violence protection.
Well, maybe it's time to make some history.
And Dr. Cornell, we've done a lot of work in Northern California in sheriff's departments and police departments around risk assessment with mental health. Yes. And I know the Los Angeles Police Department, who I've talked to, has done a lot of this. Yes. I'm told it's advanced quite a way between school districts, in our instance, county mental health departments and sheriff's and police departments. I've been told by local agencies in my county numerous dozens of instances where they interceded in the communication. So if you could just talk about how threat assessment and specific individual risk assessments have improved and where we can find best practices in that regard.
Sure. You know, I was in Canada 2 weeks ago to address a group of educators and law enforcement officers. And of course, I'm always embarrassed to go outside the United States, deal with the inevitable questions about our level of gun violence. They don't have this gun violence in France, many other countries. It's not because they arm their teachers that they don't have this gun violence. And what I noticed in Calgary is that all the schools there had threat assessment teams. All the law enforcement agencies had threat assessment teams, and they worked together. And the mental health agencies were connected into all of those. So we're behind the rest of the world in terms of this notion of focusing on prevention. And I know in California they do have a great interest, and there's a lot of folks in California who are experts in threat assessment. But threat assessment has to be calibrated to the type of setting. Schools, law enforcement, workplace violence require different approaches to threat assessment. So it's very important to keep that in mind as hopefully Congress moves forward with supporting threat assessment, that it has to be oriented toward education and school issues.
Well, thank you all. I yield back.
Thank you. Carol.
Thank you very much. I'm wearing an F. That's my score from the NRA. And you will find this button on many members, and I suspect here as well.
I've lost my button.
But it is our way to show solidarity and to say that we understand and we really wish that it was different here right now. I know that this violence can happen anywhere. Stacey, you were talking about how nothing ever happened in Parkland. Well, Elizabeth Estes' district was where that shooter lived, but he was from my district. And I tell the people in New Hampshire often when we're talking about this that if his family hadn't moved him, we could be talking about this as my district in New Hampshire. It can happen anywhere. One of my best friends was in a mall when there was a shooting. They all ran into the movie theater that was attached, and then somebody stood up with a gun. And it turned out that it wasn't a bad guy, it was a good guy, but she said if anybody else had a gun, it would have broken down to the Wild West. So that is not the solution.